So do you know when to replace a tire? When should a tire go bad? What do you think about this one? Looks like it's pretty nice, doesn't it? Until you roll it over and you see the steel belt sticking out and the tread all messed up. And this tire has never been on the road. It's a spare tire off my trailer. I'll show you a little bit here in a minute. But the tire has been under a cover almost its whole life. It's had normal pressure in it. It's never been on the ground, except like this. But this is kind of a message that we need to watch, because tires age. And they age whether they're on the ground or whether they're stored as a spare in your trunk. And it's something that tire aging is something I really hadn't thought about a lot until fairly recently. So, and this tire is about 22 years old. You need to look at this number, these DOT numbers, and the DOT numbers are coded. You can look them up online, but it usually gives like the manufacturing location and some other data. But normally the last four digits are the day and week, the week and the year that the tire was made. So this tire is from the first week of 2004, which makes sense because the camper that it was on I bought in the summer of 2004, so the tire had probably been in stock for a bit. But this isn't the only tire I've ever had trouble with. So give me a minute here. So on my Mustang here, I've got these Goodrich TAs, and I replaced these last summer. And I was kind of delinquent. I had Goodrich radial TAs on here on all four corners, and they had been on this car for literally 40 years. Because, I think the tires overall had about 30-some thousand miles on them. But in the more recent years, as this car gets older, I didn't drive as many miles. And currently I probably drive, 500 miles or less a year, and I kind of preserve the car. So the tires weren't worn at bad. So I knew I would need to replace them, but I just kept putting it off. I knew that the compound was getting harder. They didn't bite as well. And probably, I really intended to replace them for probably 5 years. I knew they were on borrowed time, and the last several years I wouldn't like. The issue for me was that I was trying to figure out what to replace them with, because the size that I used on here wasn't standard, and Goodrich doesn't make it or offer it or sell it anymore. And so I finally bit the bullet and I put the standard size tires back on it. And then they had some issue with white letters weren't staying right, and I saw some issues online. Anyway, it took me a while before I decided to replace them, and in the end, I had a tire go bad. I'll show you a picture of it here in a minute. But I was out for one of my last runs. I got away from the house and I got out maybe 5, 6, 7 miles from the house. I could feel some vibration in the steering wheel. The steering wheel was kind of shaking a little bit. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. I was driving about 50 miles an hour or so, and I could, all of a sudden, it was kind of like a pop. I didn't hear it pop, but just all of a sudden I got that vibration, and over a mile or two it was starting to get worse. So I spun the car around, and I brought it home that 5 miles at 25 miles an hour. I drove it really slow. I probably could have stopped and changed it, but I wanted to limp it home if I could. It was shaking pretty bad. The safe thing to do would have been to swap the tire out. You make your choices. So anyway, That was another bad one. Now, so let's talk about tires a little bit. Okay, so talking about tires, kind of the reason I dug into this is, well, you saw what I started with my trailer spare tire, and a lot of us that run vehicles, I'll say classic cars that don't run a lot of miles, or trailers that don't wear tires out very fast, we really need to watch. And I guess my surprise was, I'm going to say about a year or two ago, when I've been in the auto industry, I've worked for 40 years in it, and this never really came to me as a big deal. But I was in one of the tire stores, and I had a tire that I was going to hang on to off of my wife's car. She bought a new set, and I was going to save one to put on later, but it was a few years old, and he said, when it gets to be more than 6 years old, we won't put it back on the car. And that was kind of like, what? I hadn't ever run into that before. So I did a little digging, and my local tire store that I get most of my things from, national chain, they recommend replacing tires at 6 years, and they won't work on a tire that's more than 10 years old. Now, so I dug in. I was General Motors, right? So I go dig in my General Motors owner's manual, and lo and behold, it says 6 years is the recommended life for tires. Now, I don't know when that happened, but I don't remember that from my early days, 70s, 80s, whatever. We didn't run tires. We didn't worry about that. And I've run tires really long. As you heard, my Mustang, I ran 40 years on those tires. That's highly unusual. And I was delinquent. I shouldn't have done that. It really wasn't safe. But it's an example. I'm kind of trying to go through different things. My first experience with tires going bad was really in the 80s. I had a big Tornado, and it had brand new tires on it when I bought it used in 1980. And the first tire went bad after about 4 years. They were Kevlar belted, Aramid belted tires, and it started throwing a belt. And I ended up replacing a pair of them and putting one of them in the trunk. And I kept running on the others, and they ran a long time. Those tires wore like iron. They didn't wear out. I put 100,000 miles on the other two, and then they started throwing belts. And at the end, I got a puncture in a tire, and I took that spare out that was in the trunk for 10 years, and it only went about 10 or 15 miles before it started to come apart. The plies started to separate. And I replaced all those tires. I got a new set, and I was on my way, but it's something something you file away. It seems to me as though the newer tires, which have better technology, lower rolling resistance, and so forth, seem to be more susceptible to aging. That's just my opinion based on seat of the pants. I don't know what the science says exactly. I'm about ready with my boat trailer. I've got one that the one I go fishing out to Saginaw Bay with, and that. As I'm sitting here looking at things, those tires are getting to be 10 years old. Now, before I dig into that too far, let me go back here, take a look at this is one of those BF Goodrich TA radials off my Mustang. Okay, they were 40 years old, and you can see, hey, the tread's really great. They're not worn off or anything. But if you work around the edge here, you can see that the tire isn't really round, and you can see that the grooves aren't straight anymore. And right in here, there's kind of a pocket. There's kind of a low spot. And here again, you get a better look. You can kind of see you got a bulge here, and then it pulls in. This was on the right front, and it was giving me a pulsation. I mean, it was at the end. The steering was wanting to rock back and forth, say if you were at 5 or 10 miles an hour. And had I gone up and driven this car at 50 or 60 miles an hour, this tire would have probably come apart. And that would have been serious. I didn't want to damage the car. I didn't want to have a crash. the spare on this car was older than these tires. So kind of the message is you want to get your spare replaced at the same time you get your regular tires replaced. You want to get 5, not just 4. I started to talk about my boat trailer. I've got 4 tires on there, and they're now about 11 years old, and they seem to be fine. But like 11 years ago, when those were replaced, that trailer was sitting in my backyard, and I was getting ready to take a road trip a couple of 100 miles with it. And I was mowing the grass, and as I looked at the trailer, I could see a little bit of a wave in the sidewall of the tire that I hadn't ever seen before. It was kind of it wasn't real wide. It was maybe like, this wide vertical. And I took a hard look at it. It wasn't a bubble yet, but it looked very ominous. And so I scheduled, and I went down to the local tire store, and I got a set of 4 new tires put on it, like the next day, before we took off on our trip. Those tires had been on the trailer based on its age, for 15 years. And so at 15 years, they were going. Now I got another set that's 10, or 11, whatever. I need to take a hard look at those this spring when I pull it out of storage, and probably get them replaced. What seems to be the case is that tires will all have a failure rate, and they will fail at some point. I've had tires that failed at 4 years, 8 years, 10 years, 20 years. There's another trailer I won't go into. But that one was starting to weather check. It got 20 years on the tires, but they were starting to sidewall crack. And I kept driving. I was still driving on them, getting ready to replace them, when one of the sidewalls let go, as it should. I mean, it was a warning. The crack was there. And then my trailer tires at 15, these at 40. So I'm starting to build a failure curve based on me being an old dude, right? And as I go on and look at this, I realize that in some cases I was doing bad things and I was being unsafe, sometimes without realizing how unsafe I might be being. And so this is, to those of you who watch my channel, this is like, we should really pay attention, because some of this damage, this tire had no indications on the sidewall, no cracks. It had no age cracks. Didn't look bad at all. The ones on my boat trailer, you could tell there was something starting to let go in the carcass, but it had no cracks. Those tires had been in the shade and nothing was bad. This one off my camper now, that's 20 years old, again, it's just been a spare. It's been covered up. It's just been sitting there with air in it. And it has no cracks. It has no external damage. Yet, pow, right? The thing is, it's time that you really need to pay attention and watch. So let me take one more thing here. I'm going to just say is if you don't believe me, or if you'd like to study more, here is a PDF that I found online just today, and it's actually dated from Engineering, Science, and Technology International Journal 69, 2025. And it's a tire aging. It's a review of tire aging. It actually comes out of Italy, but it's pretty extensive, and it talks about oxidation and temperature and humidity, UV and ozone, and tire testing and so forth. But the point is that some of these things, like humidity, moisture, humidity penetrates through some of these materials into the inner parts of the tire. Not everything stays on the surface. So my point is, just because you see damage on the surface doesn't mean that the tire is good. And I've had now a number of tires that have failed that looked perfectly good on the outside. So in the future, I say, I was skeptical about this 6-year thing, but as I look back now and I look at my experience, I really need to start paying attention to this 6 years, and I'll say 6 to 10. And when you get past 10, for sure, the tire manufacturers agree with General Motors, and the answer seems to be 6 years. If you're going to stretch it, don't stretch it too long, and be aware, because it's one of those things where the longer you go, the higher the risk. There's going to be a failure slope, and it's going to go like this. And so in the early years, it's not a big risk, but as you go, that failure rate will go higher. And I would say is if the tire doesn't fail, recognize that as it ages, the compound changes. It tends to get harder. So your traction and braking, your traction is less, your braking distances will get longer, your handling won't be as good, and you got an increased risk of failure. So that's my message for today. And thank you for watching, and if you liked it, please click like and subscribe and help my channel out, and drive safe.